Hello again YouTube, I'm back with another video, and no, this time we're not going to be saying anything bad about Genshin. Instead, however, I'm going to be ranking every 5-star Hydro character from 6 to 1. Now, before I get into this video, I'm just going to preface this. If you know, I'm an Ayato main and really just Hydro supremacy in general, so I'm going to try and keep it as unbiased as possible and really just tell you guys what I personally think who the best Hydro characters are in order. Before I get into the video though, did you guys know that over 90% of you guys aren't subscribed? That's crazy. Like, imagine losing over 90% of your 50/50s. That'd be terrible, right? So maybe sub so I don't curse you and ruin all your 50/50s. Alright, in last place, number 6. Now, this might come as a surprise because she kind of just came out, but Niwu. Now, if I'm going to be honest, when I first pulled for her, I really didn't expect her to play her much at all, but now that I fully leveled her and her Bloom team, I gotta say, it's probably one of the most funnest teams I've ever played. Now, yes, compared to something like my fully built international team that I've spent months to build, the damage doesn't even really come close. But when you realize that I've only spent like 2 weeks leveling up this team to the state it's at now, it's actually pretty good. The main downside for Niwu in general is how she's not really used in any other team except for a Bloom team. But before you Niwu stands start commenting, I do have to talk about some of her other teams. Now, yes, you can run her in a national team with Bennett, Zhongli, and Kaz, but the rotation for that is a bit weird, and compared to Childe's national team, the damage is like significantly lowered. Aside from teams, the good thing I like about Niwu and her really entire Bloom team is how you don't really need to farm for artifacts. Like, if you're endgame, you understand the pain of trying to get high crit value on every piece you have. That's kind of the opposite with this team. I really only need to farm for main stat EM pieces, and I don't even have to use artifact sets. I mean, yeah, it's helpful to have one of your Dendro characters on 4-piece Deepwood, but that's really it. The other 3 characters can technically just off-piece every single artifact, and it would kind of perform the same. I mean, obviously 2 or 4-piece Gilded, 2-piece Wanderers, and like 4-piece Instructor will give my party more EM, but it's not like it'll completely kill your damage if you don't do that. Now, I'm going to play a little showcase of each character's best teams I talk about in this video to maybe convince you guys to consider pulling for them. I'm going to say this now though, this team isn't for everyone, which is fine, but maybe in the future if you want a completely new playstyle, this one is extremely satisfying and kind of fun to play. Another thing to note, this is Spiral 3.2, which does have a Bloom buff, but nevertheless, this team performs pretty well for being free to play. Alright, on to number 5. Kokomi. Now, personally, I feel like Kokomi is a pretty good pull on a lot of accounts. She's one of, if not the best Hydro player in something like a Freeze team, and has a bunch of other teams she can be used in like Sukokomon and like a mono Hydro team. Not only does her kit have a lot of utility, she's also one of the best healers in the game, and since she is Catalyst, she can wield Throwing Tails or Dragon Slayers to buff your party even more. As for artifacts, she can be a pretty good off-field DPS with the Ocean Hued Clam set, but if you don't really want to run her as a DPS, you can also put her on 4-piece Tenacity, which gives your team 20% attack when your elemental skill hits an opponent. Since her skill is basically just an AoE turret which gets refreshed when she uses her ult, she can basically have 100% uptime on the 4-piece buff if you do your rotations right. All in all though, you'll get 20% attack from Tenacity, 48% attack from Throwing Tails, and an insane healer, which in my opinion makes her a pretty good all-rounder unit. Alright, showcase time. As you can see here, Kokomi in a Freeze team, which is arguably her best team, is actually really good. Now, aside from the characters, this team is 100% free to play with no 5-star weapons at all. Despite this team having 3 5-star characters, if you have Ayaka and either Venti or Kazuha, Kokomi might not seem like that bad of a character to pull for. Next up, number 4. Now, I put Mona here over Kokomi because of really just one main thing. Mona can also be run on Throwing Tails and Tenacity, albeit not as good as Kokomi, but the difference is their ults. Now, if you don't know what Mona's ult does, it basically increases your damage dealt to an enemy if they're affected with the Omen status. Now, I'm gonna be honest, Mona is kinda a confusing character, so I'm not really gonna get into it super hard, but her damage buff isn't anything to laugh at. Despite her having lower Hydro application than Kokomi, the amount of extra damage you're going to get from Mona's kit is so much higher. I was actually sitting here for like an hour deciding on whether or not Mona or Kokomi is better because their use case scenario is really similar. They essentially do the exact same thing, except Mona gives a damage buff and Kokomi heals. Another reason I put Mona over Kokomi though is because Mona is a standard banner character that you don't technically have to wait for. I would assume that a lot more players have Mona rather than Kokomi, which automatically makes her the better character because if you have her from losing a 50/50, you basically just got a limited banner character that can't heal but instead gives an insane damage boost. Alright, that was pretty quick, but now we're on to 3. I've said this in other videos and I still stand by it. Yelan is probably the character I tell most people to pull for. Not only is she actually really fun to play, she's so useful. After you do Spiral and complete it as far as you can, all you really have to do is explore the map and do the story. Since Yelan is also the fastest character in the game, she's so nice to have in the open world and saves me so much time getting from quest to quest, because this goddamn Sumeru update makes me walk across the map to talk to another person every single time. Now, personally, I would say there isn't one best team yelan has because of how versatile she is, but this is sort of a main DPS yelan team, and I gotta say, it kinda does a lot of damage. In one rotation, I can do a bit over 500,000 damage, which isn't bad for mainly an off-field DPS. This team is also really comfy because, as you can see, I get my ults back really quickly despite having like no ER on my yelan. Now, I didn't really want to talk about this, but for the whales, since I kind of wanted to keep it real, all the characters I talked about previously were at C0, but I gotta say, yelan at C6 is probably one of the most broken units in the game. If you haven't seen a C6 yelan showcase, it's actually insane how much damage she does. All in all though, yelan is one of the characters I recommend everyone to pull for, despite people saying like Seiun does the same thing and such, but whatever, she's fun and really useful. On to number 2. Now, this could be a controversial pick, but Childe. Now, for the theory crafters, they would probably put Childe at number 1 because of the Childe national team, but let me explain. This video is particularly mainly about just the character themselves and not really their respective teams. Childe as a character though has one huge flaw, which makes me just barely use him in the open world, and that's his cooldown. For those of you who don't know or don't play Childe, his cooldown, if not accounted for, can be like 45 seconds, which is so fucking long. It got to the point where I just pulled for his C1 so I can use him in the open world, and I still don't use him because it didn't really help much. Aside from that though, that's really his one and only flaw, which can honestly be overlooked and fixed by just having another damage dealer in the party. Enough about the bad stuff though. I would honestly say Childe is by far the most satisfying character to play in the entire game. You might have seen some other Genshin videos talking about his Riptide just destroying everything, but just look at this. I intentionally took off some of his artifacts so I can show you, but god damn is this so nice to look at. Aside from that though, he's also the only character in the game to have 2 weapon types. I mean, he does use a bow, but he can swap that to a close range sword, which I also think is really cool. Childe is also one of the only characters in the game that has something called quadratic scaling, which if you don't know what it is, I'll just link a video from 1010 in the description explaining further, but basically it makes it so the amount of attacks he does scales way higher than normal. For example, if you hit 2 enemies at a time, they both get hit 4 times, and it scales more and more. So in this specific clip, I'm hitting 7 enemies, but actually every time I attack them, I'm hitting them 49 times, which is insane. When it comes to satisfaction gameplay and team comps, I honestly think Childe will never get topped, and for that reason, he's a number 2. Alright, last one. Now, if you see my other videos, you know I start every single one off with Ayato staring into your soul, and I gotta say, he stared into my soul when his first banner came out. Now, I know, I said in the beginning of the video that this ranking was not gonna be biased, but let me explain what made me play Ayato in the first place. Like I said earlier, DPS characters that are good in the open world is the main reason I pull for them, and that fits Ayato perfectly. Not only does 99% of his damage come from his elemental skill, it's a short 6-second downtime and deals a shit ton of damage. When it comes to raw hydro damage at C0, I would personally say Ayato takes the cake, but unless you're fighting multiple enemies, then Childe kinda wins so hard, which made it a pretty difficult decision on who I put where. Not only is Ayato extremely easy to build and play, he has a lot of good free-to-play options. Matter of fact, you might not believe me, but this entire gameplay showcase you've been watching has been with my 4-piece Heart of Depth set, which isn't even his dedicated artifact set, and a level 80 free-to-play weapon. But back to the reason why I think he's number 1. To me, Ayato is one of the most versatile characters in the game, and he has so many different artifacts, weapons, team choices, and can be used as a main or sub DPS. I mean, yeah, he hasn't broken any records, but as a hydro applier for a freeze team, Ayato's actually really good. He also has a taser team, international team, and a hypercare team, which is enough for me to 9-star 12-3 actually relatively easily. Even though I said this earlier though, Ayato is so good in the overworld because he doesn't need his ult to kill anything, and since he's a fairly tall character, he can run a little faster than some others. I actually have this one overworld team when I need to explore, and it literally makes everything so much faster. I would actually attribute the reason I 100%ed Sumeru so quickly in like 2 weeks was actually because of this one team. Basically, double Animo with Kazuo for vertical movement and Seiun for healing and horizontal rolling around movement, yelan to run even faster when Seiyu skills on cooldown, and Ayato to kill anything that comes in the way. There actually hasn't been one thing in the overworld that I wasn't able to kill except for bosses in just this one specific rotation: yelan, Kazuo, and Ayato's skill. All in all though, I think Ayato is one of the best characters in the game, not because he has an insanely high nuke or deals the most damage, simply because of how versatile he is. Well, anyways, that's my list. It might sound a bit biased, but I actually do love every single character in this list. I mean, I am Hydra Supremacy after all, and pulled for all of them, so yeah. If any of you guys share a different opinion, post it down in the comments. I want to know if people think the same as me, or I'm just omega biased because I've used Ayato since his launch. Also, I barely plug the Discord, but maybe join in and say what's up. I'm there a lot and sometimes give away Welkin or something when I feel like it. Well, that's all folks. Ayato Supremacy.